Rayburn Watley sat and watched his wife, Jolene, make a scene on the dance floor of the community hall. Everyone was watching her. For 6 years, he had been dreading the possibility that this night might come. Of course, he wanted a lot of things. Jolene was a beautiful, energetic woman. For 6 years, their social life had been limited to what they could do together or with their 2 boys. There were no parties, no social gatherings, no socializing with friends or acquaintances. Frankly, they had very few friends to socialize with. Rayburn Watley had several reasons for insisting on this strange arrangement. First of all, he was extremely jealous, and Jolene attracted arrogant boys. She was different from the girls back home in many ways. She knew how to groom herself and dress in the latest fashions. She was educated and sophisticated, yet fun and playful. She was also a great flirt. That's where the problem arose. Why would a jealous man marry a woman who likes to tease and flirt with everyone she meets? Rayburn kept his wife on a short leash. Their son Brian had just turned 5, and Tyson was almost 4. Taking care of them and the household was practically a full-time job. Rayburn tried to make things easier by taking everyone out as often as possible. He was constantly bringing home gifts for his wife, trinkets, flowers, and candy. He had once read in a magazine that such things would keep the little woman satisfied, and that was all he wanted. Tonight's dance was a corporate event. Rayburn worked for a small family-owned construction firm. He worked hard and kept to himself so he wouldn't get in trouble. Yeah, trouble. That was the second reason he was so keen not to attend social events. He was born and raised in Rockingham County, Virginia. It was the extreme western part of the state, and if you walked another half-mile, you would be in West Virginia. He had 3 brothers and a sister, and he missed them very much. His oldest brother, Thompson, was currently in prison. His sister, Nadine, and 2 younger brothers, Grayson and Fletcher, still lived in the area. He hadn't seen any of them in over 6 years since he was forced to leave, which brings us back to the second reason. Thompson was in jail for beating a man so badly that he spent 2 months in the hospital. Rayburn lived and worked 2 states away from home for the same reason. Thompson and Rayburn had a temper and fought like banshees when they were aggravated. When the first blow was thrown, neither of them felt any pain or what could be called mercy. The only way to stop them was physical restraint. Nadine was the same way, but seemed to control herself a little better. The 2 younger brothers were the most common. Everyone teased them for having a different father, which their mother didn't like. Rayburn's life was a balancing act, constantly managing his jealousy and temper while trying to keep his family life stable. Watching Jolene now, dancing and flirting on the dance floor, his anxiety was palpable. He wanted to rush in, to drag her off the floor and keep her safe from the eyes of those arrogant boys, but he knew that would only make things worse. His mind raced with memories of his family, his temper, and the constant struggle to maintain control. As he watched her, he remembered why he had married her in the first place. She was everything he wasn't, free-spirited, lively, and full of energy. But now, that very energy was causing him immense stress. He wanted to protect her, to keep her from the world that could harm her, but he also knew he had to let her be herself. It was a paradox he lived with daily. The dance floor scene was a stark reminder of why he had kept their social life so limited. It wasn't just about his jealousy, it was about his fear of losing control. Jolene represented everything he had to suppress within himself. Her freedom and flirtatious nature clashed with his deep-seated insecurities and fears. Rayburn's thoughts were interrupted by a loud cheer from the dance floor. Jolene was now dancing with a young man, and the crowd seemed to be enjoying the show. Rayburn's fists clenched involuntarily. He took a deep breath, reminding himself of his responsibilities, of the need to remain composed. This was his life, a constant battle between the desire to protect and the need to let go. He had no easy answers, but he knew that tonight he would have to find a way to navigate this emotional minefield once again. As the night went on, Rayburn's inner turmoil grew. He watched as Jolene laughed and danced, seemingly oblivious to the effect she was having on him. The music, the lights, the people, it all seemed to blur together. Rayburn felt like an outsider in his own life, watching from a distance as the world moved around him. Finally, Jolene made her way back to their table. her face flushed with excitement. "Did you see me out there?" she asked, her eyes sparkling. "I saw," Rayburn replied, forcing a smile. "You didn't seem to be having much fun," she said, a hint of concern in her voice. "I'm just tired, that's all," he lied, trying to keep his voice steady. Jolene reached out and touched his hand. "I know this isn't your favorite thing, but it means a lot to me that you came." Rayburn squeezed her hand, feeling a surge of love and frustration. "I know. I'm glad you're having a good time." They sat in silence for a moment, the noise of the hall fading into the background. Rayburn watched as Jolene's attention shifted back to the dance floor. He knew this was a part of her he could never fully control or understand. And maybe that was okay. Maybe he needed to learn to let go a little, to trust her more. As the night drew to a close, Rayburn felt a sense of relief. They gathered their things and made their way to the car. The drive home was quiet, both lost in their thoughts. Rayburn knew they had a lot to work on, but he was willing to try. For Jolene, for their boys, and for the fragile balance of their life together. When they arrived home, Rayburn put the boys to bed while Jolene got ready for bed herself. He watched her as she moved around the room, her energy finally starting to wane. She caught him staring and gave him a tired smile. "What is it?" she asked. "Just thinking about how lucky I am," he replied honestly. She walked over and kissed him gently. "We're both lucky." As they lay in bed that night, Rayburn held Jolene close, feeling the warmth of her body against his. He knew there would be more challenges ahead, but for now, he was content. They had each other, and that was enough. For now. Rayburn's mother lived with Nadine, who was married to a truck driver. He didn't come home too often, and many people understood why. Virginia and West Virginia authorities were waiting for Rayburn to come home to capture him. It didn't matter which of them was lucky. In any case, the same fate awaited him as Thompson. Rayburn sat quietly in the back of the room watching his wife. Jolene danced and joked with all the men, married and single. She was a coquette and enjoyed every minute of her free time. Too much time had passed. She missed the parties, the dancing, and the fun. She was glad Rayburn had taken her along, but resented him for not doing it more often. She was on edge, making up for lost time. It had been a good night for Jolene. As the night wore on, things got looser and looser. Rayburn watched as the boys began to slowly fondle his wife. They seemed to be testing to what limits they could reach with her. For the most part, she held them back and was good-natured about it, most of the time. Benny Cordetti was one of the co-owners of Bright Bill Enterprises. He was a loud, arrogant goon whom Rayburn disliked but tolerated because he was the boss. It was important not only to make a living, but to keep a low profile. As the night waned, Benny began to get more creative and adventurous with his hands. It was a slow dance, and Benny had both hands around Jolene's ass. She didn't protest and just kept dancing as if nothing was happening. Rayburn clutched the empty, long-necked bottle as hard as he could, but there was no way it was going to break. Jumping up, Rayburn hurled the bottle across the room directly at his boss. Fortunately, it hit Cordetti's shoulder and not Jolene's. The force of the blow was enough to make the large man fall to one knee and start cursing. Jolene turned around just in time to see her husband grab his partner and start dragging him across the room. He got into position to start beating the asshole who dared to grope his wife, but never got around to it. 3 guys grabbed Rayburn and pulled them away from each other. "What the hell are you doing? You idiot!" shouted Cordetti, picking himself up off the floor. "You touch my wife again, you fat bastard, and I'll rip your head off!" Rayburn roared. "We just danced," Cordetti protested, rubbing his shoulder. "We danced all night. A lot of guys danced with her." "Yeah, but none of them felt her ass while they were doing it," Rayburn spat. "I had no problem letting people dance with her, but I won't allow it any further than that. You crossed the line." "You're crazy, Rayburn," Cordetti sneered. "You're a psycho and a drunk, and to top it off, you're fired too." Rayburn's heart pounded in his chest as he stared down Cordetti. The room had gone silent, all eyes on the confrontation. Jolene stood frozen, her face a mix of shock and something that looked almost like pride. "You can't fire me for protecting my wife," Rayburn shouted back, but his voice had lost some of its earlier fury. The reality of the situation was sinking in, and the consequences of his actions were becoming clear. "Watch me," Cordetti said with a smug grin. "You're out. Now get the hell out of here before I call the cops." Rayburn hesitated, his mind racing. This job was his lifeline, the only thing keeping him afloat. But the image of Cordetti's hands on Jolene burned in his mind, fueling his anger. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside him. "Let's go, Jolene," he said finally, his voice low and controlled. He grabbed her hand and pulled her towards the exit. The crowd parted to let them through, whispering and murmuring in their wake. Outside, the cool night air hit Rayburn like a slap to the face, clearing some of the haze from his mind. He turned to Jolene, his eyes searching hers for some sign of what she was thinking. "Rayburn," she said softly, her voice trembling. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," he replied firmly. "No one disrespects you like that, not on my watch." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I understand. Thank you." They walked to the car in silence, the weight of what had just happened settling over them. Rayburn's thoughts were a tangled mess of anger, regret, and a fierce, protective love for the woman beside him. As they drove home, Rayburn felt a sense of dread creeping in. He had no idea what the future held for them now that he'd lost his job. But one thing was certain: he would do whatever it took to keep Jolene and their boys safe and happy, even if it meant starting over from scratch. When they arrived home, Rayburn put the boys to bed while Jolene got ready for bed herself. He watched her as she moved around the room, her energy finally starting to wane. She caught him staring and gave him a tired smile. "What is it?" she asked. "Just thinking about how lucky I am," he replied honestly. She walked over and kissed him gently. "We're both lucky." As they lay in bed that night, Rayburn held Jolene close, feeling the warmth of her body against his. He knew there would be more challenges ahead, but for now, he was content. They had each other, and that was enough. For now. "Come in tomorrow and get your last check," Benny sneered. "Kick that bum out." Jolene stood with her mouth open. She had never seen her husband in such a state. She had no idea what had caused all this. Up until now, she had envisioned him as a caring, loving husband. She'd noticed him getting a little upset when she flirted, but never anything like this in 6 years. Rayburn looked at his wife for some encouragement, but saw none and was escorted out. 10 minutes later, he was home. He paid the babysitter and laid down on the couch. He wasn't drunk. He knew he was better, and he'd had enough to drink overnight. He sat in the dark living room. The only light came from the kitchen. He realized that someone had given his wife a ride home when he heard the car door slam. He didn't look to see who it was. Was it Benny? "Thank you for making this night unforgettable," Jolene called out as she entered the house. "I've never been so humbled." "Thank you so much, Rayburn." She tossed her bag on the chair and noticed her husband didn't say anything back to her. "Did you hear me? Are you awake? Or are you so drunk you can't think straight?" she snapped. "I'm fine. I see you made it home," he replied, his voice devoid of emotion. "No thanks to you," she shot back, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Rayburn didn't feel like arguing with her. He was sitting here because he didn't want to be in bed when she got home, if she did. "By the way, I gave you your job back. Come back tomorrow as usual." "What the hell did you do? Did you sleep with him so he'd give me my job back?" As soon as the words left his mouth, he regretted saying them, but it was too late. "Hell no. I gave him a blowjob so he'd give you your job back. I had sex with him because I wanted to." Jolene was beyond furious as she slammed the bedroom door shut. Her words hurt him more than anything else in his entire life. He realized she was furious, but she had no idea what kind of demon she had let loose. Rayburn spent the night in his truck. After eating breakfast, Rayburn began waiting in the company parking lot for the payroll office to open. Waiting was bad because it gave him time to think. He replayed the events of the previous night over and over in his head. He always stopped when he got to Jolene's confession, or whatever it was. "Hell no, I gave him a blowjob so he'd give you your job back." Those words echoed in his mind like a relentless drumbeat, each repetition fueling his anger and despair. The image of Jolene with Benny was more than he could bear. He had always suspected something like this might happen, but hearing it confirmed was a different kind of pain. As he sat in the truck, his knuckles white from gripping the steering wheel too hard, he tried to calm the raging storm inside him. He knew he needed to keep his composure, especially now when everything seemed to be falling apart. But the betrayal, the humiliation, and the anger were too much to contain. Rayburn watched as the first employees started to trickle into the parking lot, giving him curious looks. He didn't care. His mind was fixated on the upcoming confrontation. When the doors finally opened, he walked into the office, his heart pounding in his chest. "Morning, Rayburn." The payroll clerk greeted him, trying to sound casual. "Morning," he replied curtly, handing over his employee ID. "I'm here for my last check." The clerk nodded and disappeared into the back room. Rayburn stood there, trying to keep his breathing steady. He thought about Jolene, about their boys, and about the life they had built together. He thought about how fragile it all seemed now, how easily it could be torn apart. The clerk returned and handed him an envelope. "Here you go. Good luck, Rayburn." "Thanks," he muttered, stuffing the envelope into his pocket. As he walked out, he saw Benny standing by the coffee machine, smirking at him. Rayburn's blood boiled, but he forced himself to keep walking. Confronting Benny now would only make things worse. When he got back to his truck, he tore open the envelope and looked at the check. It was a small consolation for everything he had lost. He sat there for a moment, staring at it, before crumpling it in his fist. Rayburn drove home, his mind racing. He needed to talk to Jolene to figure out what their next steps were. When he walked into the house, she was sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale and drawn. "We need to talk," he said, sitting down across from her. Jolene looked at him, her eyes filled with pain and regret. "I know, I'm so sorry, Rayburn." "I know you are," he replied, his voice softening. "But we need to figure out what we're going to do next. We can't go on like this." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't want to lose you." Rayburn reached across the table and took her hand. "We'll get through this, but we need to be honest with each other, and we need to work together. Can you do that?" "Yes," she whispered, squeezing his hand. "I'll do whatever it takes." Rayburn felt a glimmer of hope. It was going to be a long, hard road, but they had a chance. And for now, that was enough. He stood up and pulled her into his arms, holding her close. Together, they would face whatever came next. "I had sex with him because I wanted to." Those words echoed in Rayburn's mind as he watched Benny Cordetti drive up in his black Cadillac. Damn, nobody drove those anymore, he thought. Finally, feeling that everything should be ready to go, he went inside. The payroll girl seemed hesitant to write him a check, but finally did. Before he left, he signed some termination forms regarding medical certification and tax information. Rayburn breathed a sigh of relief as he walked outside, but he was too late. "Hey, Rayburn, what the hell's going on?" Rayburn asked, turning to see Benny approaching. Benny looked even bigger and pudgier in the daylight. "Didn't the old lady tell you? It's all right. I took you off the fire," Benny said with a smirk. Rayburn waited as Benny walked toward him. Several workers stopped what they were doing and stared in their direction. "I'm sorry this whole misunderstanding happened, Rayburn. I'm sure everything will be fine from now on. We all look forward to having you and your wife at our parties more often," Benny continued, his wide grin only fueling Rayburn's anger. Benny Cordetti looked at Rayburn Watley with that infuriating grin, and that was a mistake. Benny was a full foot taller than Rayburn and weighed at least 60 pounds more. But none of that mattered. The big man was on his feet longer than Rayburn expected. Finally, Rayburn felt, or rather heard, a few ribs crack under his assault. This caused Benny to drop to one knee. The steel-toed boot quickly snapped the kneecap that was in front of him and dropped him to the ground. Benny's exposed gonads were the next target, and when he rolled onto his back to defend himself, Rayburn was immediately on his chest. Most of the blows landed on Benny's face. One of the missed punches broke his collarbone. The sharp pain in his right arm caused Rayburn to start using his left. By the time several workers pulled Rayburn away from the battered body, Cordetti's face had turned into a bloody mess. Two of the workers ended up on the ground in their efforts to restrain him, and then they all let him go, and he went to his truck. A few people were helping Cordetti, but most of them looked at Rayburn in awe. None of them had ever witnessed such a sight. When he got home, Brian and Tyson were playing in the yard. Rayburn opened the door and whistled. In a flash, both boys were in the truck. Rayburn watched in the rearview mirror as Jolene stood on the back porch, screaming and waving her arms. "Tough shit," he muttered under his breath, starting the engine and driving off. The kids chattered excitedly in the back seat, oblivious to the turmoil their parents were experiencing. As Rayburn drove, he felt a strange mix of relief and anger. The tension that had been building for so long had finally exploded, and while the fight had been brutal, it felt like a release. He thought about what to do next. The job was gone, but maybe that was for the best. He needed to figure out a way to support his family without putting himself or his wife in compromising situations. When he finally pulled over at a rest stop, he turned to his boys. "We're going on a little adventure," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "How about we visit Uncle Grayson and Aunt Nadine for a while?" The boys cheered, excited at the prospect of seeing their relatives. Rayburn smiled, feeling a glimmer of hope. Maybe this was the change they needed. Maybe getting away from the toxic environment they had been living in would be the best thing for all of them. Rayburn looked out at the horizon, the sun beginning to set. He knew they had a long road ahead, but he was determined to face it head-on. For his boys, for himself, and even for Jolene. They would find a way to make things right, to build a better life. As they continued driving, Rayburn felt a sense of resolve. He didn't have all the answers, but he had the determination to find them. And with his boys by his side, he knew he could face whatever came next. The future was uncertain, but it was also full of possibilities, and for the first time in a long while, Rayburn felt ready to embrace it. An hour later, they were on Highway 81, heading south. The boys were eager to have lunch at Mickey D's, but they soon started asking about their mother. Rayburn tried to change the subject by telling them about the good time they would have at Aunt Nadine's. Rayburn stopped by Nadine's place, who immediately sent him to Fletcher's. Fletcher had just gotten married and rented a house that was twice the size he needed to make his new bride happy. She had a 4-year-old son from a previous marriage, so everything worked out well. Fletcher and Grayson worked in Arlington. They usually left Monday morning and returned Friday night. It wasn't the best situation, but it was a good, steady job. Nadine and Fletcher's wife, Garnet, spent most of the evening with Rayburn. Nadine had a lot of free time and was planning to drive down to Pennsylvania to pick up all the clothes and toys for the boys. Rayburn laughed when she volunteered so quickly. If anyone could handle Jolene, it was Nadine. She was mean, tough, and nasty as hell. Rayburn could never understand how she managed to get a man to marry her. He thought she must have intimidated him, or he had a wooden leg and couldn't escape. She wasn't amused when he talked about it. Nadine insisted that Roger had married her because of her looks and pleasant character. Then, she always laughed at her own joke. She left at first light and reached home by lunchtime. "Who the hell are you?" Jolene still wasn't dressed. It was obvious she had been crying. "I hate to say it, but in this case, it's true. I am your worst nightmare." "Oh shit, what now? I can't take it anymore." Jolene walked slowly into the living room and sank down on the couch. "I'm Nadine, Rayburn's older sister. I promise not to hurt you, but I won't put up with any nonsense either. Understood?" "No, I don't understand," Jolene said, her voice trembling. "You are in my house, and you are not my master. As long as you're in my house, I'll do and say whatever I want. I don't care if you like it or not." Suddenly, Nadine realized why Rayburn had married this woman. She looked like a Barbie doll, but she had balls. She couldn't understand how she and Rayburn hadn't beaten themselves to death over the past 6 years. Jolene stared at Nadine, a mix of fear and defiance in her eyes. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "I want you to get your shit together," Nadine replied bluntly. "Rayburn and the boys need stability, and you need to decide if you're going to be part of that or not." Jolene's eyes welled up with tears again. "I know I've made mistakes," she said softly. "I know I hurt Rayburn, but I love him, and I love our boys. I just don't know how to fix this." Nadine sighed and sat down next to her. "Listen, Jolene, I'm not here to judge you. We all screw up, but you need to figure out what you want and fight for it. Rayburn's a good man, and he's hurting too. If you want to make this work, you need to be strong and face this head-on." Jolene nodded, wiping her tears away. "You're right. I need to be stronger. I want to fix this. I want my family back." "Good," Nadine said, her tone softening slightly. Then start by getting dressed and coming with me. We have a lot to sort out, and it starts with you standing up and facing your problems." As Jolene got up to get dressed, Nadine couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could all find a way through this mess. Rayburn sat on the porch, watching the boys play in the yard. He saw Nadine's car pull up and felt a knot of anxiety in his stomach. Nadine stepped out first, followed by Jolene. She looked different, more determined. They walked up to the porch together. "Rayburn," Nadine began, "Jolene has something she wants to say." Jolene took a deep breath and looked Rayburn in the eye. "Rayburn, I'm so sorry for everything. I know I've hurt you, and I've let you and the boys down. I want to make things right. I want to be the wife and mother you deserve. Can we try to fix this together?" Rayburn looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded slowly. "All right, Jolene, let's try to make this work, but it's going to take time and effort from both of us." Jolene nodded, relief flooding her features. "I understand, and I'm ready to do whatever it takes." Nadine watched the exchange, feeling a sense of satisfaction. Maybe they had a long road ahead of them, but it was a start, and for now, that was enough. If any woman talked to Rayburn like that, he'd punch her in the face, whether she was a woman or not. Apparently, Rayburn never gave this woman any slack. "Jolene, do you have anything we could eat for lunch? I haven't had breakfast today." "Yes, come into the kitchen. I can whip something up real quick. Would you like some coffee?" "I'd rather have a Coke if you have one." For several minutes, neither woman spoke. Nadine sat, Jolene served, and then sat down. "Where the hell is my husband?" Jolene asked, breaking the silence. "Why do you care?" Nadine shot back. "He is my husband, and he has my children." "Where are my children?" Jolene demanded. "With your husband. They are safe and having a good time." "Where the hell is it?" Jolene pressed. "This is my house. Stop playing cute word games with me," Nadine replied sharply. "They live in Rockingham County." "Why? Because if he had stayed, he probably would have killed you." "Why the hell does he want to kill me?" Jolene's voice trembled. "Because you cheated on him. No Watley man would tolerate that. Hell, I can't understand why you're here now." "Oh shit," Jolene muttered under her breath. "Stupid, stupid, stupid." "Do you want to explain that?" Nadine asked, raising an eyebrow. "Do you want another Coke?" Jolene deflected. "No, but I'll have some coffee now." Jolene poured 2 cups of coffee. Nadine brushed off the offer of cream. "When I got home from the damn party, I told Rayburn that his boss was humbled and that he still had a job," Jolene began, her voice shaking slightly. "When Rayburn made some smart-ass remark about me screwing his boss to keep his job, I snapped. I told him I had given his boss a blowjob and that I had sex with him because I wanted to." Nadine sipped her coffee, her expression unreadable. "And did you?" Jolene hesitated, then nodded. "I did it because I felt desperate, and I thought it would fix everything, but it only made things worse." "You think?" Nadine replied dryly. "Rayburn loves you, but he's got his pride. You humiliated him in the worst possible way." Jolene buried her face in her hands. I know, I messed up. I just want to make things right." "Well, you better start figuring out how," Nadine said, her tone softening just a bit. "Rayburn isn't the type to forgive easily. You've got a long road ahead of you." Jolene looked up, tears in her eyes. "Do you think there's any chance?" Nadine sighed. "Maybe, but it's going to take more than just words. You're going to have to prove to him that you're worth it, and that's not going to be easy." Jolene nodded, determination settling over her features. "I'll do whatever it takes." Nadine stood up, taking her empty coffee cup to the sink. "Good. Start by not doing anything stupid from now on. And maybe, just maybe, you'll get your family back." The rest of the afternoon passed in a tense silence. Jolene spent the time cleaning the house, her mind racing with thoughts of how to win back Rayburn's trust. Nadine watched her, occasionally offering advice or a critical comment. By the time evening rolled around, Jolene was exhausted, but a little more hopeful. Rayburn returned just after sunset, the boys chattering happily as they ran into the house. Jolene's heart leapt at the sight of them, but she kept her distance, unsure of her reception. Rayburn's expression was guarded as he stepped inside, his eyes locking with Jolene's. "Nadine," Rayburn greeted his sister, giving her a quick hug. "Thanks for looking after things." "No problem," Nadine replied, glancing between Rayburn and Jolene. "You two need to talk." Rayburn nodded, then turned to Jolene. Can we sit down? He asked, his voice calm but firm. Jolene nodded, leading the way to the living room. They sat on the couch, the tension between them almost palpable. Rayburn, Jolene began, but Rayburn held up a hand. Let me talk first, he said. I love you, Jolene, but what you did, it hurt. A lot. I need to know if you're really committed to making this work. I am, Jolene said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm so sorry, Rayburn. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Rayburn looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, we'll take it one step at a time, but it's going to be hard, and it's going to take time. I understand, Jolene replied, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, Rayburn. I won't let you down. Nadine watched from the doorway, a small smile playing on her lips. Maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. As Rayburn and Jolene began to talk, really talk, she felt a glimmer of hope for her brother and his family. It was a long road ahead, but they were taking the first steps together, and for now, that was enough. I hit the ceiling. I was furious. That he could even think such a thing was beyond me. I did the only thing that came to my mind. I gave him a smart-ass answer. That's what got me into trouble. What the hell did you say? Nadine asked, eyes narrowing. I said I gave his boss a blowjob to get his job back, and that I slept with his boss because I wanted to. Nadine took a sip of hot coffee. I'm surprised he didn't kill you right then and there. You must be a real blonde because the stupidest thing a woman has ever said to Rayburn Watley. Really stupid. Jolene didn't answer anything. What happened that got Rayburn fired in the first place? Nadine pressed. All night, I acted like a student at a frat party. I could see that Rayburn was upset with me, but I was having so much fun that I didn't want to stop. I was doing one last dance with Rayburn's boss, Mr. Cordetti, when the situation finally got out of hand. Cordetti put both hands on my cheeks. I told him to remove them immediately, or I'd kick him in the balls so hard he wouldn't be able to walk for a week. I didn't want to make a scene, but I was too late. Before we knew it, Rayburn had thrown a beer bottle at Cordetti and hit him in the shoulder. I think he was aiming for his head. That sounds like my brother, Nadine said with a nod. One thing led to another, and in a fit of rage, Cordetti fired Rayburn on the spot. Rayburn ran out before things subsided. I spoke to Mr. Cordetti for about 10 minutes, and he admitted that it was a bad move on his part and that Rayburn was justified in what he did. He said Rayburn could keep his job and apologize to me. He also asked me to apologize to Rayburn for him. I didn't have that opportunity. So you never had sex with that Cordetti guy? Nadine asked, raising an eyebrow. Hell no, Jolene replied vehemently. I was just so angry and hurt by Rayburn's accusation that I said the most hurtful thing I could think of. Nadine sighed and put her coffee cup down. You both have a lot of work to do to fix this mess. Rayburn's pride is wounded, and you've got to show him that you're committed to making things right. Jolene nodded, tears forming in her eyes. I know. I don't want to lose him. I love him and our boys more than anything. Good, Nadine said, softening slightly. Then start by being honest and showing him that you're willing to fight for your family. And remember, actions speak louder than words. Jolene took a deep breath, steeling herself for the road ahead. I'll do whatever it takes. The next day, Rayburn returned home, the boys in tow. Jolene was waiting for him on the porch, her heart pounding. As he stepped out of the truck, their eyes met, and she felt a flicker of hope. Rayburn, can we talk? She asked, her voice trembling. Rayburn nodded, his expression guarded. All right. They sat down on the porch steps, the boys running off to play in the yard. Jolene took a deep breath and began, I want to start by apologizing. I said some horrible things out of anger and hurt, and I regret them deeply. I didn't mean any of it. Rayburn listened, his eyes locked onto hers. Go on, he said quietly. I know I've made mistakes, and I know I've hurt you, but I love you, Rayburn. I love our family, and I want to make this work. I want us to be a family again, she said, tears streaming down her face. Rayburn took a deep breath, his expression softening slightly. I love you too, Jolene, but this isn't going to be easy. We've got a lot of healing to do. I know, Jolene replied, wiping her tears, and I'm ready to do whatever it takes. Rayburn reached out and took her hand. All right, we'll take it one step at a time, but we're going to do this together. Jolene nodded, relief flooding through her. Together, she echoed. As they sat there holding hands, watching their boys play, They both felt a glimmer of hope. It was going to be a long road, but they were ready to face it together. And for now, that was enough. Later that evening, as the sun set and they put the boys to bed, Jolene looked at Rayburn with a determined expression. "I'm going to fight for us, Rayburn, every single day." Rayburn smiled, pulling her into a hug. "And I'll be right there with you, every step of the way." They stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, ready to face whatever the future held. It wouldn't be easy, but with love, honesty, and determination, they knew they could rebuild what had been broken. And for now, that was more than enough. "There's no way I'm thinking about cheating on Rayburn." "Why did you say that?" Nadine asked, her voice sharp. "Because I was furious. He just accused me of being a slut. I wouldn't tolerate that kind of shit from anyone, including him. Before I knew it, my mouth was spewing all that shit, and there was no way to take it back. The only person who slept with him that night was me. I did it for me and my big mouth," Jolene explained, her voice breaking. Jolene gathered up the empty cups. She seemed to be crying, or at least her eyes were watering. "What are you going to do now?" Nadine asked, her tone softer. "I don't know," Jolene replied, looking lost. "Do you have any suggestions? You seem to know a lot more about Rayburn than I do. Did you know he's wanted by the law in 2 states? "What? No, I didn't know that. What the hell did he do?" "Damn, girl, that's a dumb question. What did he do to Benny Cordetti yesterday morning?" "Oh God, no. Cordetti won't be out of the hospital for at least 3 weeks. This is the Rayburn we all love and adore." For a few minutes, both women sat in silence, each lost in their thoughts. "He can't come back here, can he?" Jolene finally asked, breaking the silence. "No," Nadine replied. "He can't stay there either?" "That's right. What the hell are we supposed to do?" Jolene's voice was tinged with desperation. "What do you mean, we? You're not among Rayburn's favorites right now," Nadine pointed out. "Oh shit, he doesn't know the truth. There's no way he knows what really happened. Shit, I'm in trouble again," Jolene muttered, panic creeping into her voice. "Look, Jolene, it was very interesting to meet you. I enjoyed the luncheon conversation, but now I need to get the baby's things and hit the road," Nadine said, standing up and gathering her belongings. "Can I come with you?" Jolene asked, her voice small and hopeful. Nadine looked at her for a long moment, considering. "Fine," she finally said, "but this isn't going to be easy, and you need to pull yourself together. If we're going to fix this mess, we need to be strong." Jolene nodded, wiping her tears and trying to steel herself. "I understand, let's go." They packed up the baby's things and headed out. As they drove, Jolene couldn't help but feel a mix of fear and hope. She knew the road ahead would be tough, but with Nadine by her side, maybe they had a chance. As they drove, Nadine filled her in on more of Rayburn's past. "Rayburn's always had a temper. He's been in trouble before, but he's a good man. He's just complicated." "Why didn't he ever tell me?" Jolene asked, feeling a pang of hurt. "Maybe he was trying to protect you, or maybe he thought you'd leave if you knew. Either way, it doesn't matter now. What matters is fixing this," Nadine replied. They pulled up to the house where Rayburn and the boys were staying. Jolene took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. She knew this wouldn't be easy, but she was determined to make things right. As they approached the house, Rayburn came out, his expression unreadable. The boys ran to Jolene, hugging her tightly. She hugged them back, tears streaming down her face. "Rayburn," she began, her voice trembling. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I want to make things right. I love you and our boys. Please, give me a chance to fix this." Rayburn looked at her for a long moment, his eyes searching hers. Finally, he nodded. "All right, Jolene, but it's going to take time, and it's going to take a lot of work." "I understand," she replied, relief flooding through her. "I'm ready to do whatever it takes." Nadine watched the exchange, a small smile playing on her lips. Maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. As Rayburn and Jolene began to talk, really talk, she felt a glimmer of hope for her brother and his family. It was a long road ahead, but they were taking the first steps together, and for now, that was enough. As they settled in for the evening, Rayburn looked at Jolene. "We'll take this one day at a time, but we're going to do it together." Jolene nodded, feeling a renewed sense of determination. "Together," she echoed. They sat together, holding hands, watching their boys play. The road ahead would be challenging, But with love, honesty, and perseverance, they could rebuild what had been broken. And for now, that was more than enough. Hell no. Are you trying to get me killed? May I have your phone number? I can handle it, but don't expect me to take sides. Rayburn is my brother. Blood comes first. We have money in the bank that we've been saving to buy a house. Rayburn needs money. I can get it for him. He's fine. He's with his family. He doesn't need anything. Hold on to that money. You might need it. 2 hours later, Nadine was on the road, heading south. She had to be home in time for dinner. In the evening, there was a big family gathering. Nadine told Rayburn what Jolene had told her, but he didn't believe it. Until she proved otherwise, he would assume that what she had said first, in the heat of anger, was true. The story she'd told Nadine was a far-fetched cover-up. The main problem was what he should do next. He couldn't stay where he was, and he couldn't go back to Pennsylvania. Fletcher had a friend who owned a company that built yuppie log cabins in Winchester, Tennessee. A quick phone call, and one problem was solved. Garnett was going to keep Brian and Tyson at his place until Rayburn found a place to live. Garnett was making great grits. Nadine was going to bring them over, help Rayburn set up the house, and find some babysitting for the boys while Rayburn worked. Rayburn wasn't going to leave until Monday morning, so he had a whole weekend to spend with his family. Although Rayburn tried his best to get home without anyone finding out, he failed. Someone recognized him, and it didn't take long for it to be known. It never reached the ears of the law, but it did interest several people. Rayburn Whatley was a local legend. As Saturday unfolded, the Whatley family gathered in Nadine's cozy living room, the air filled with the aroma of Garnett's famous grits and the sounds of laughter and conversation. Rayburn sat in a corner, watching his boys play with their cousins. He couldn't help but feel a pang of nostalgia mixed with the uncertainty of what lay ahead. "Nadine," Rayburn called out, catching his sister's attention as she passed by with a plate of freshly baked biscuits. "I appreciate everything you're doing. I really do." Nadine smiled, her tough exterior softening for a moment. "You're my brother, Rayburn. We look out for each other. We'll get through this." "Do you think Jolene really told you the truth?" Rayburn asked, his voice tinged with doubt. Nadine paused, considering her words carefully. "I don't know, Rayburn, but I believe people can change, and maybe she realized how much she stands to lose. Only time will tell." Sunday morning dawned bright and clear, and the family decided to have a picnic by the lake. As they set up blankets and unpacked baskets of food, Rayburn found a quiet moment with his boys. Brian and Tyson were full of energy, running around and laughing, blissfully unaware of the turmoil their parents were facing. "Dad, can we go fishing?" Brian asked, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "Sure, buddy," Rayburn replied, ruffling his son's hair. "Let's get the rods and see what we can catch." As they sat by the water, lines cast and waiting for a bite, Rayburn felt a sense of peace wash over him. It was a fleeting moment, but it was enough to remind him of what he was fighting for: his family, their future. By the time Monday morning rolled around, Rayburn was ready. He loaded his truck with the essentials, said his goodbyes to Nadine and Garnett, and set off towards Winchester. The road stretched out before him, a symbol of the new beginning he was determined to make. Arriving in Winchester, Rayburn met with Fletcher's friend, who showed him around the small but charming log cabin that would be his new home. It was modest, but it had potential, and Rayburn felt a spark of hope ignite within him. He could make this work. Nadine arrived later that day with Brian and Tyson, along with boxes of their belongings. Together they unpacked and began to settle in. Nadine helped Rayburn find a local babysitter who came highly recommended by the community. She was a kind older woman named Mrs. Wilson, who immediately took a liking to the boys. As the days turned into weeks, Rayburn threw himself into his new job, building beautiful log cabins that seemed to blend seamlessly with the natural landscape. The work was hard, but it was honest, and it gave him a sense of purpose. Evenings were spent with his boys, cooking dinner together and exploring their new surroundings. Slowly but surely, they began to build a new life. It wasn't easy, and there were days when Rayburn questioned everything, but he never lost sight of what he was working towards. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Brian looked up at his father with a serious expression. "Dad, do you think Mom will come here?" Rayburn paused, looking at his son. I don't know, Brian, but I hope so. I hope she does. Back in Pennsylvania, Jolene was doing everything she could to prove herself to Rayburn. She sought counseling, started volunteering at a local shelter, and wrote letters to Rayburn, pouring out her heart and soul, hoping he would read them and see how much she wanted to make things right. Nadine, ever the fierce protector of her family, watched over them all, providing guidance and support. She knew the road ahead was long, but she also knew that Rayburn and Jolene had something worth fighting for. Months passed, and slowly but surely, a sense of normalcy returned to Rayburn's life. The boys were thriving, enjoying their new school and making friends. Rayburn's work was steady, and he even began to see a future where they could be truly happy again. Then, one crisp autumn evening, as Rayburn was tucking the boys into bed, there was a knock at the door. He opened it to find Jolene standing there, her eyes filled with determination and hope. Rayburn, she said, her voice steady, I've come to fight for our family. Rayburn looked at her, his heart pounding. He saw the sincerity in her eyes, the resolve in her stance. It wouldn't be easy, but nothing worth having ever was. Come in, Jolene, he said, stepping aside. Let's talk. As she stepped into the warmth of the cabin, Rayburn felt a sense of hope. They had a long way to go, but for the first time in a long while, he believed they could make it. Together. And so, as the leaves turned and the first snow began to fall, the Whatley family embarked on a new journey. It was filled with challenges and uncertainties, but also with love, forgiveness, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. And for Rayburn, Jolene, Brian, and Tyson, that was more than enough.